Dr. Diane Mueller is a board certified sexologist. She is the founder of My Libido Doc. She's working to make conversations about sex as natural as chatting over coffee. Welcome to the show, Diane.
Thank you. And what a great intro. That's exactly what I'm doing. And it's so pivotal, right? Like we see studies and surveys, for example, that show that of all the couples that report to have the happiest relationships and the best intimate life, 92% of them talk about sex. So it's really, really high. And it's still so taboo. Like I'm still fighting a lot with social media platforms, for example, to get word out and be able to talk about this in like professional, respectful, kind, ways. And so it just shows this need so much of how to get this conversation out of taboo and more into the normalcy from a standpoint of health, longevity, and relationships.
Well, amen there. I remember a time where it was inappropriate to talk about politics, but we seem to have gotten over that one. Still not quite there about money, and certainly, yeah, sex is still not on the tip of everybody's tongue necessarily.
It's true. It's true. But it's a necessary thing. It's like even in the longevity and the biohacking space, it's so interesting. There's so much research that's going on around anti-aging and living longer, for example. And we see things like intermittent fasting's gotten a ton of press. We know that there's certain things we can do like NAD injections, for example, that help the mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell, on and on and on. I could spend probably 10 minutes listing these things. But what's so interesting is when we are actually looking at, say, for example, a Harvard study that came out in 2023 the study showed that of all the things longevity wise that they looked at, of all the things, the number one thing that made the biggest impact on them living longer and healthier and happier is the quality of their relationships. And so it's just amazing to me that, this study was just published 2 years ago. And even with that, the idea of sex and healthy relationships is still not a common part of our health and wellness landscape, of our health and wellness conversations. And we also see, like, I'll throw one more stat at you just for kind of laying the foundation here, because I think it's so important, is that there's another survey that showed that 70% of people want to talk to their doctor about sex, but don't. So to me, that's just like there's so many little things and little ways we can see the importance of this, the value of this, the need of it. And yet it's just kind of left to the wayside and not really brought into the conversation.
Interesting. So, if we have become comfortable having open conversations about our politics, if we are comfortable, well, maybe we're not comfortable buying Viagra or Cialis or whatever, but I feel like maybe we are, and there's now more companies that are doing that. Is that just because we're comfortable doing that online and not having a conversation in person? But people want to talk to their doctors about it.
I mean, a few different things. I think it's one thing to go in and say, hey, doc, can you hook me up with that little blue pill? Right. I think that's one thing. But we have to understand that when we have any sort of imbalance in libido, right, what we're really talking about is an imbalance in the physical body and the oftentimes the emotional body and the relationship. And I use the term imbalance because I really like to take the stigma out of this. Like, even if we're talking vaginal dryness, erectile dysfunction, any of these things that a lot of times people have a lot of shame around, we really need to get the shame out of it, because all we're talking about is just another thing, like just any other health or interrelational issue that is simply an imbalance, nothing more, nothing less. And when we're talking about some of these drugs that you've mentioned, a lot of the common drugs that are used for men work by through various mechanisms causing more blood to flow to the genitals, right? But when we're really looking at low libido or a desire mismatch, which is so common where one person in a relationship wants sex more than the other, what we're really talking about here is that something like blood flow, while it's important, is oftentimes only one piece of the root cause pie. So the way I say this is, like, after 15 years of practice, I have not seen one patient that has only one root cause of their chronic thing, whatever chronic illness they're dealing with. We sometimes could say, okay, well, in acute medicine, there's one root cause. So, like, if somebody gets strep throat, well, that's probably from the strep bacteria. But even that, we could even say, well, why is their immune system out of balance? Maybe they're not getting enough sleep. Maybe they're not eating right. And all of that combined with actually getting that bacterial infection. So I say this in response to your comment on Cialis and Viagra, because when we're really looking at any libido imbalance, we have to imagine like the root causes of low libido, kind of like a pie. And we could say, out of that pie, if we're going to divide the pie into six root causes, and there's many, many more, but for simplicity, let's divide it into six and say that, okay, well, blood flow for women or men is one of those pieces of pie. So often what can happen is, hey, we get on something like Viagra or Cialis, and maybe that improves performance. And maybe we're actually, doing a little better and it's fixing some things. Well, it's not fixing those other five pieces of the pie. So oftentimes people will have just similar like with testosterone is another example. They'll have these boosts where they'll feel a little bit better, but then maybe like their partner's that interested and not that interested, or maybe they're bored in the bedroom, or maybe they're like, while they can last, now they're finding that they have a problem like getting started, and there's that lack of desire that way. So we really need to take a step back and say, okay, well, blood flow, Cialis, Viagra, et cetera, is one very, very important piece of the pie. But when we're talking about imbalances, it's usually more than just one pie piece.
Yeah, I don't doubt that. Okay, so blood flow being one of those root causes of root cause pie, which I really like. I've never heard that term before. I've always been of the mind that root cause is just one thing, but there's no
Most
reason it
people
couldn't
are.
be. It couldn't be six things. So blood flow, what are just generally those six areas?
So it's actually six areas was an example. So I'm going to
Okay.
actually bring it out into more because I oversimplified it. And now that we're going to go there, I want to really answer thoroughly.
You're perfectly it's fine to oversimplify things with me, but by all means.
So the way I break this down, I break the root causes of libido imbalances into three pillars. So
Okay.
we have our physical pillar, which I'll explain. We have our personal pillar and our interpersonal pillar, and I'll explain them all.
Okay.
So in the physical pillar, we have things that are all related to physical imbalance of the body, right? So we have circulation, that's one of them. Stress and our stress hormones like cortisol, that's another. Other hormones like our sex hormones, testosterone, estrogen, DHEA, that's a third. Another is neurological system. So is our brain properly sending the signals to our genitals to say, hey, blood flow there, tissues engorged, don't feel pain, etc. So that's neurological. And then we have pelvic floor imbalances. And pelvic floor imbalances, like the most common thing people think of is like, oh, women doing Kegels after things like childbirth. But what we don't actually talk about a lot is that pelvic floor imbalances are when the pelvic floor and the muscles that make up the pelvic floor, there's 14 of them, when they become too tight, or actually in most cases, they actually become or too lax, too stretchy. So it can work either way. So I shouldn't say most cases. There's actually plenty of cases where they're too tight and people are holding too much. But one of the biggest points I want to make is that dysfunction is not just women. Men actually can have a lot of pelvic floor imbalances. For them, it might show up as like urinary incontinence, or more commonly things like low back pain. Those are really big sign of pelvic floor imbalances in men. But because those muscles oftentimes are not working correctly, they're not stretching and relaxing, that actually is directly related also to things like erectile dysfunction. So inability to hold an erection, inability to last as long as they want, for example. So and then there's a few other things on the physical root side. Blood sugar makes a big difference. Inflammation, toxins make a big difference. So we have a lot of things in that physical root pie. In the pie for the personal side of things. Now, this is where we get into, and there's studies on this, like body image, for example, genital image, like how people think, like, for women, it's like, well, what are the labia? What are the lips supposed to look like? For men, it's like, how big are they, right? And these common things that through the porn industry and other things in the media, both women and men have these like rules on themselves oftentimes around like, well, this is what genitals look like. This is how they look when they're sexy. And like, if I'm not that, which is actually very common not to be what we see in the media, then, they're thinking that there's something wrong with them, that can lead to problems. Sexual shame is a big one. How well we know our own body. there is so much that men can do, for example, with learning on their own how to control orgasms. I was on a podcast a couple weeks ago, and somebody said that the host said something like, well, yeah, it's like normal for men to only last 5 minutes. And, while that it's common, right, that intercourse is really short, there's exercises men can do and practice during masturbation through breath work, through making sound, that actually are shown, and I see this over and over again, to allow them to last much longer, 20, 30, 40, 50 minutes and beyond. And for women, oftentimes in this sphere, in the personal pie, it's really oftentimes also related to how well they know their own anatomy, and like so much like I'll show you like a picture here. This is you do this video, right? People will see this, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so I have a picture up for those people that are watching on or listening just audio only. But this picture, what I'm showing is like the clitoris, which a lot of people think is just like the bulb. It actually has these long legs, which are like these like wishbones, and they go down along kind of under the labia along the pelvis. And so think of like a wishbone is really what the clitoris looks like. And then next to that, between really the outer and the inner labia are these bulbs, and these bulbs have a ton of erogenous tissue, which means they engorge. This is where, like, when blood flows to the female vulva, these areas swell. And many times there is more sensitivity in these areas than various parts internally for a woman, and yet they go ignored. And so for a woman, like oftentimes in the personal sphere, it's like not even understanding her body well enough to be able to ask her partner to do something different or suggest or try anything, because she doesn't know her own anatomy enough. So that's in that kind of personal pie. And then in the interpersonal root cause, it's all about how we interrelate, how we communicate, how well do we ask for our needs, wants, preferences, and desires. How do we bring in fantasy or novelty or other things that we want to explore to keep things passionate, those sorts of things. So those three pillars, we could say, are all related to potentially low libido or desire mismatch. And the more, just like with anything else in health, the more we are working on all three pillars and addressing all these things, really the more alive our sex life can be.
Which certainly does make sense because all those things that you described probably keep me from doing lots of things. So
Yeah,
just being a healthy human
exactly.
being, certainly if they're full of toxins and I've got bad blood sugar and full of inflammation, I just don't feel good about myself. I'm probably not going to be super excited to take off my clothes and have sex. So,
Correct. Correct. Exactly. When we don't feel good in our body, that's a huge driver of those things. And, one of the things I even talk about in my book is I do really believe in like body positivity, right? I do really believe we should give our body love at any size, or yeah, love at any size. But one of the things that I think has happened with the body positivity culture is we're saying healthy at any size. And I know this will get me some hate. It does when I say this, but there's too much research saying that, hey, of certain, BMIs, and sometimes BMI can be related to a lot of muscle or other things, but a lot of times it's not. So, of when people are carrying too much excess fat, is really what it is. We can oftentimes see cholesterol go out of balance. We can see inflammation markers go out of balance. Oftentimes it's related to insulin resistance and blood sugar issues. So I really just don't see, it's like we see there's so much with that and problems with health. So I do believe at any size we should be like honoring our body and saying sweet things to it and loving it at any size, and really working to just be like happy despite that challenge. But it really, any of those things, when we're carrying a lot of excess weight, it has the tendency to cause a lot of these imbalances. And I think really getting to the root cause of why that is truly is important.
yeah, I certainly echo that. And body positivity has never made any sense to me at all. I echo everything you just said. I don't want people to feel bad about themselves, but I also know that if you are a healthy person, you will feel better about yourself. So both of those things can be
Right.
true at the same time, perhaps.
Correct. Both and not either or.
Yeah, certainly. So there's so much. I think really important, really good stuff here. And I appreciate how you broke it out into the physical, the personal, and the interpersonal because it's tough just as an individual to do these things and also really hard to be doing it with somebody else, be it my girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever partner, whoever it is. We're all going through all this stuff. And then we're really busy. I've got 3 kids, for example, and I've got a career and work and places to go and people to do, and I'm stressed out and I'm tired and maybe I am overweight too. So there's lots of factors.
Yeah, they're
Or are
really,
these just excuses?
well, I mean, I think it's a both and thing, right? I mean, I think there's a real reality to the fact that most of us are really balancing in a modern society a ridiculous amount of things, right? Between everything you mentioned and plenty of things you didn't mention. I think most humans, most adult humans in modern society's lives look like some variation of what you just described. So there is a reality to that. But one of the exercises I love to give people is to write out, and this is just for awareness, like to write out a list of your most important values. What do you value the most? And if you're in a relationship, hopefully your partner is right there at that top, right? Because what we've also seen and a lot of research has shown that, hey, like having this person truly as that priority really makes a difference with that relationship actually working or not. So hopefully they're right at that top of your value list. And then what you can do is, make another pie chart. I talk a lot about pie. Make another pie chart and make 24 pieces of pie, each representing an hour of a day. And hopefully 7 to 9 of them, somewhere in that, hopefully are dedicated to sleep. And then write on an average day what you're doing with all those other hours. And if you do not see your value of your partner being somewhere in that pie chart, this is a problem. And anybody that's in more like the relationship therapy world would definitely say this, right? Where it's like, if you're not prioritizing, if you saying this person is the most valuable to you, but in the time wise, you're not actually reflecting that value into your life. Honestly, a really good first step with this is starting to make that change, is saying, okay, well, what needs to actually change here? Because if we continue to live our life where our pie is going to all these other people, but not to what we value the most, that relationship tends to, statistically speaking, not last. And I think that's just a really good like point of awareness, like beyond even sex, like do you have this person as a priority in your life? And it's very easy not to. It's very, very easy not to in our incredibly busy lives. But oftentimes for many people that is the first thing. And this is also why in much of my work I talk about scheduling intimacy, and that is emotional intimacy oftentimes, but it's also sexual intimacy. And many people say like, well, Dr. Diane, this sounds like so non-spontaneous and like, not fun and not sexy. But what's interesting is if we go back to when we were dating, if we go back to when we were dating, it was all scheduled. It's like, okay, well, whatever date, however many dates into the relationship you were, when you first like had your first kiss, when you had your first makeout session, when you made love for the first time, all of that was probably scheduled and planned in advance. Like, oh yeah, we're going to have a date tonight. It might turn into this. So I'm going to make sure I put on my perfume, my cologne, and wear my cute undies, right? So that is actually scheduled. And it's really only when we move in together, when we combine our lives, when we do all these things, that we actually then stop scheduling it. So it actually, when it was really hot and really passionate, it was scheduled, it was a priority. And so some of the initial step too with all this is like starting to say, is this person a priority? And we know when we're talking about the gym, our kids, anything else, we put in our calendar and we give it space and we give it attention and we give it a spot, it has more likelihood of being attended to, right? I know during the beginning of a week, I know with every day of my week, I know when I am working out, right? That's a priority. And so it is in my schedule. So same thing, if it's a priority for our relationship, it is something that has to have a piece of that pie.
Oh, I love that. I couldn't agree more. Say that your relationships are important to you. Where's the evidence?
Right.
It's not in your calendar. There is no evidence that that is actually a priority. It's just kind of a wish at that point, if it even is, or it's just you
Exactly.
saying it is, but it's not really. Spontaneity. I don't, I think you summed that up perfectly. Um, Thank you for that. I need to get some cute undies and maybe ask my wife if she wants to have a makeout session with me. I don't know if we've done that in a minute, so I think that
Yeah,
that's great.
it's time.
I think it might be time. I'm going to text her in just a minute. How how far has how much damage has porn done? How much damage is OnlyFans doing to this?
I think it can go either way. I think one of the best ways I've had porn described to me that I love, this was by the founder of the vibrator company, Mystery Vibe, which I just love that company. They do so much research. And one of the founders, said it to me like this: porn is fantasy. We don't watch something like Superman and then all go out and think we could fly, right? When it comes to superhero movies or DC or Marvel kind of stuff, it's very easy for the human brain to be like, "Oh, that's fantasy," and categorize it over there and realize that that's fun to play in, it's fun to be in that world, but then we quickly come back to reality and we know that hey, we're not jumping off any buildings and think we're going to survive, right? So we know the difference between fantasy, we know the difference between reality. We can't fly. And with porn, I think one of the things that probably from a damaging side of things, definitely from a damaging side of things, where I think a lot of times people watch it and they compare, what sex looks like, what sex is supposed to be like, how long it's supposed to last, what other people's bodies are supposed to look like with their bodies, their genitals, all these different things. And so there is some level of conscious porn out there. And, I've definitely talked to plenty of people who have brought porn into their intimate life and do it in a way where, okay, well, this is cool. This is a turn on. And now we're going to go do our thing. So I do think there are ways that porn can be used in a way that is responsible, right? In a way that is very erotic. It's like reading an erotic book. But the biggest thing I think that's important is for people to realize like what they're watching is oftentimes high fantasy, and it should be used as such versus like a comparative thing of this is what sex is supposed to be like, this is what my body is supposed to be like, this is what my partner's body is supposed to be like. And I think that's where that industry has really led people wrong, is when that human brain conflates and thinks that just because it's fantasy it's actually reality.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I can see a lot of danger with that. My thought process was more just people are meeting their needs individually through those things. And, there's going to be a sex robot walking around everybody's house in about 10 minutes, it seems like. So I can't imagine that's going to help either.
It's interesting on things like oxytocin, which is our orgasm hormone. Oxytocin is one of the only things in the body, hormone wise, that's on a positive feedback loop. But there's is not the only. There are others. But most of our body's hormones are what's on a negative feedback loop. So what this means is, for example, if I have enough thyroid hormone in my body, if my brain says, "Oh, you are low in thyroid," it tells my thyroid to kick out more. My thyroid goes up and up, and then finally I get enough thyroid, then my brain will kick on and say, "Oh, you don't need any more. You got enough. Stop producing so much thyroid." We call that negative feedback. When you have enough of a hormone, the brain says, "Stop, no more." Oxytocin, which is the main orgasm hormone, is on a positive feedback loop. So oxytocin, basically, as we get more of it through orgasm, what it actually tends to drive is like, well, I want more pleasure. So there can be something said, and I've seen this as well, like when people are between relationships and maybe they got out of a relationship and they really at the end they weren't engaged much sexually, and all of a sudden they start masturbating, and all of a sudden their sex drive comes back on. So there can be a lot of said to be like turning oneself on and being in that thing if it's really creating an issue where it's like, oh, I don't want this, I'm good. honestly, in my mind, that is more than just the porn. That is more than way more than just the self pleasure. To me, it's like that gets blamed, but there's an more underlying root causes that really need to be addressed there around like, okay, well, what is actually going on with you if you're in a partnership? What is actually going on with you and your partner where you're more interested in that with yourself versus, your partner? And that to me is so far beyond just the like porn. There's definitely porn addiction. That is a very real thing. But for most people, what is fundamentally underneath it from a root cause that I think is beyond just like, being interested in self-pleasure.
All back to the root cause pie, Dr.
Yep.
Diane. I
Like I
love it.
said, I talk a lot about pie.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. Where can people learn more about you? How can they engage with you? Where can they check out the podcast or the books? Everything that you are doing.
So, a few things that I want to make sure people are aware of. So, when we're talking about these root causes, especially from a physical standpoint, I really encourage people to go take my free quiz. So that's at libidoquiz.com. So super easy, libidoquiz.com. And when you take that quiz, it's going to not only spit out some of your likely root causes, but you're going to get a follow up email with tests to ask your doctor about. Because oftentimes we know your like doctors, unfortunately, are not running very thorough tests. So the point of what you'll find at libidoquiz.com is information so that you can advocate for yourself with your doctor to get more thorough tests done. So, really good resource for you there. My book, you can find my book, which is called Want to Want It at wanttowantIt.com. So it is as of right now on pre-sale. And so there's special bonuses with it. It goes live November 3rd, 2025. So if you are purchasing it, right around that time or before there, you get a ton of bonuses, like I said. And then the final thing to tell you about is my podcast. So that is called Libido Lounge. It's found on any major podcast and minor podcast platforms. So whatever your favorite way of listening is, you can find Libido Lounge there. You can even find it in Spanish. I have a few episodes. We're working on converting it to Spanish. So you'll find if you look up Libido Lounge in Espanol, you will also find it in Spanish.
Excellent. Well, if you enjoyed as much as I did, show Diane your appreciation. Share today's show with a friend who also appreciates good ideas. Go to libidoquiz.com and take the quiz and then get access to those questions to follow up with your doctor. Pick up your copy of what? Oh,
Want to want it.
I wrote it down. I just can't read my handwriting. Want to Want It. And you can do the pre-sale right now. And when it goes on sale November 3rd, obviously pick up the copy of it and then check out the Libido Lounge podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thanks again, Diane.
Thank you.
Until next time, remember, do your part by doing your best.